They say the dead speak only when forgotten, but in some places they never stopped whispering. Welcome to Whispers of Asia, where ancient rites, cursed soil, and fading prayers awaken what should have stayed buried. Tonight, we travel to Bali, to the mist-veiled cliffs of Gunung Kawi, a temple carved into stone where the echoes of the dead linger longer than the living. Beneath its moss-covered shrines and cracked offerings, something sacred has rotted. A son returns to bury a father, a ritual left undone, and a lineage about to be unbound. Light your incense, close your mirrors. This is the story of the Mourner of Gunung Kawi.
The plane landed in Denpasar just before dusk, and Adi could already feel the weight of the island pressing into his skin. Not heat, not humidity, but something older, like the breath of a place that remembered him, even when he tried to forget it. He hadn't been back to Bali in over 17 years, not since the day he left the village with his mother and never returned. His father had remained, stubborn and unmoving, like the old banyan tree that loomed over the family shrine. When the call came that the old man had died, Adi felt nothing. No grief, no sadness, only obligation. The family's ancestral village lay far from the tourist beaches and bright markets, a jagged 2-hour drive into the highlands, where the jungle thickened and GPS signals flickered like candlelight. The car's wheels skidded on mossy stone roads, and with every mile deeper, the silence grew louder. It wasn't until the final bend, the one that curved like a spine around the cliffs of Gunung Kawi, that Adi felt something shift. The birds stopped chirping, the leaves stopped rustling, even the wind forgot how to breathe. The village greeted him with eyes, not words. Women carrying baskets paused mid-step. Children disappeared behind cracked wooden doors. A stray dog whimpered and darted away. The old houses with their carved gates and frayed offerings leaned inward as if listening for secrets. Adi's uncle, Wayan, met him at the gate. "Come, it's ready," he said, voice brittle. "The cremation?" Adi asked. Wayan didn't look at him. "Before nightfall." There were no chants, no gongs, no scent of flowers or holy water, just dry wood and the limp body of a man Adi barely remembered, his father, the ex-priest, wrapped not in ceremonial cloth, but in plain white linen. His face was covered, lips sewn shut with black thread. No one from the village stood near the fire. They watched from behind fences, whispering. Wayan handed Adi a torch. He didn't take it. "I don't know the rites," Adi said. "You're not meant to perform them," Wayan replied, eyes hollow. "They're not allowed anymore." After the flames had licked the linen to ash and the last bone cracked in the fire, the embers revealed something strange. A ring of blackened threads curled around the pyre's edge, untouched by flame. They looked like hair, or rope, or both. Before Adi could speak, a voice hissed behind him. "He wasn't buried," said an old woman sitting near the banyan tree. Her eyes were cataract white, her voice trembled like incense smoke. "He was bound." Adi turned, but Wayan grabbed his shoulder. "Don't listen, she's half mad." The woman's hands, wrinkled like river stones, clutched something, a small doll wrapped in cloth, its face pierced with a rusted nail. "I saw the rites," she whispered. "I heard the bells, but not the kind that call gods." Adi felt the ground shift beneath him. That night, he stayed in the family compound. The wall smelled of mildew and sandalwood. His father's room had been locked, but the shrine was open, its offerings stale, its incense damp. The mirrors in the house seemed permanently fogged, as if breath still clung to the glass. He tried to sleep. He couldn't. At midnight, he heard bells. Not from the village, from the cliffs. At first, he thought it was the wind playing tricks, but the sound was rhythmic, slow, and ceremonial, like the bells worn by temple priests during ancestral rites, except these sounded wet, like metal dipped in water, echoing through stone. He stepped outside. The jungle pulsed with silence. In the moonlight, the path to Gunung Kawi shimmered with dew and something else. Mud, footprints, bare, leading away from the shrine toward the cliffs. In the morning, Wayan was gone. So was the dog. Only muddy footprints remained, smudged at the threshold of the gate. The villagers refused to speak. They averted their eyes when Adi passed, but he noticed something. Every home had a mirror draped in black cloth. Every shrine bore signs of neglect. Offerings were placed, but never touched, as if given not to honor, but to appease. He returned to the shrine and found an old box behind the statue of Ganesha. Inside were scrolls, ink faded, pages brittle, but he could read enough. Pitra Yadnya, the ritual for the dead, a sacred passage for the soul to return, to release, to ascend. But this version had notes, edits, handwritten additions in ink darker than the rest. What if a soul refuses release? One note read. What if the karma must be transferred, not burned? Another page was marked with a symbol he'd never seen before. A circle pierced by a thread, tied in 7 knots. Below it, a line was scrawled hastily. To bind the spirit is to halt its fall, but everything unravels eventually. That night, the bells returned, but this time they came with crying, faint, wet, muffled, like someone sobbing through cloth. Adi opened the door. No one was there, but the footprints had returned, only now they circled the shrine, again and again and again, and at the center of the shrine, the incense stick had relit itself. The smoke rose, backwards. The jungle had always been a boundary, a veil of green between the sacred and the living. But now it felt thinner, frayed, as if something behind it had grown impatient. The next morning, Adi walked the path behind the family compound, where the earth sloped downward into a dense curtain of bamboo and banyan. The air was moist, heavy with the metallic scent of morning dew, and something older, like rotting cloth left too long in holy water. He followed the same footprints from the night before, still faintly visible in the damp earth. They stopped near the edge of the rice fields, then vanished, as if lifted by wind or by will. A woman stood nearby, her back to him, staring into the jungle. She wore a black kebaya and held a woven basket of offerings. Without turning, she spoke. "You shouldn't follow where the dead walk." Adi hesitated. "What do you mean?" She placed the offering gently at the base of a tree, flowers, coins, and a tiny mirror covered in ash. "The temple calls when it is hungry," she said, "but you feed it with prayer, not with footsteps." Back at the village, Adi confronted his uncle Wayan, who had reappeared without explanation. The man looked thinner, his skin drawn tight across his face, eyes rimmed with a restless shadow. "I found the old scrolls," Adi said. Wayan didn't look up. "You should burn them." "You knew what father was doing, didn't you?" Wayan finally met his eyes. "Your father wanted to rewrite what cannot be rewritten." Adi stepped closer. "He tried to bind spirits. That's what the notes say." "No," Wayan's voice was sharp. "He did bind them." He stood, walked to the door, and closed it. "You don't understand the cost," he whispered. "Pitra Yadnya is sacred because it releases the soul, but your father believed he could reroute karma, tie it to others, redirect it away from himself." Adi felt a chill crawl down his back. Did it work? Wayan said nothing for a long time. Then, he was never supposed to be exiled, but after the last ritual, a child died, a child from another bloodline. No illness, no wound, just empty, cold. The silence of the village was unnatural. Even at midday, the birds were cautious, the prayer flags barely stirred, and the shrine bells were coated in dust. He asked a few villagers about the temple. Each of them shook their heads. "Gunung Kawi is closed," one old man croaked. "No one goes there now, not since the 7th night." "7th night of what?" They didn't answer. That evening, Adi visited the family shrine again. The air around it had changed, like walking into a damp cave. The smell of burnt cloth lingered in the corners. The offerings he'd placed earlier were gone. In their place, a new item, a doll wrapped in shroud-like linen, soaked and heavy. He picked it up. Water dripped from its feet. The mirror behind the statue had fogged once more, but this time a handprint was pressed into it from the inside. Unable to sleep, Adi sat with his father's scrolls, rereading the notes. The diagrams were esoteric, full of intersecting lines, broken mantras, and what appeared to be inverted rituals, symbols scratched in reverse as if seen from a mirror. One phrase kept returning: "Do not enter after the 7th night." He flipped back and forth through the pages. It was written not once, but dozens of times, sometimes underlined, sometimes circled in red. A memory stirred, distant and small. Adi, as a child, asking his father why they never visited the temple during funerals. The old man's reply, spoken without blinking: "Because by the 7th night, the soul is no longer alone." The next morning, Adi climbed the path toward Gunung Kawi. The jungle seemed to watch him, vines sagging low like reaching fingers. Statues overgrown with moss lined the steps, their eyes eroded but still unmistakably pointed at the temple. At the final gate, a sign carved in cracked stone: "After the 7th, not even gods return." He crossed the threshold. Gunung Kawi opened before him like a forgotten wound carved into the cliffs. 11 towering shrines cut directly into stone, their faces blackened by time, their insides sunken in darkness. There was no one there, yet the air thrummed, not with sound, but with a pressure in the bones, like standing near a tuning fork moments after it struck. He approached one of the carved tombs. The stone was cold, cracked, and something was leaking from the seam. He reached out, fingers brushing the damp surface, and then the silence broke. A single bell rang behind him. He turned. Nothing. Then another. Slow, ritualistic, familiar. Ching, ching, ching. The sound grew closer, not louder, closer. He backed away, and from the mouth of the furthest shrine, something emerged. A figure, wrapped head to toe in linen, stained and sagging. It stood upright, yet slightly bent, as if it had never learned how to walk properly. Its arms were bound to its sides, its face was veiled, but from beneath the cloth came a sound so mournful, so soaked in grief that he couldn't move. It was weeping, through cloth, through death. He ran, branches tore at his clothes, bells rang behind him in the rhythm that matched his pulse. When he burst from the jungle and back into the village, the world felt wrong, tilted, slowed. At the family gate, he collapsed, and there in the mud outside the shrine were footprints, bare, damp, and facing inward. That night, Wayan told him the truth. "You want to know why no one speaks of the temple?" he said, voice trembling. "Because it is no longer a place for prayer." He lit a candle and set it between them. "Your father tried to cheat karma. He believed he could contain his sins in the spirits of others, tie their paths to his. But karma does not disappear. It waits, and when the knot frays," he leaned forward, "it unbinds everything." Adi stared at him. "The weeping spirit, it's real." Wayan nodded. "They mourn for the dead who never left, and for the living who no longer can." Outside, the bells rang once more, but this time they were joined by footsteps, slow, wet, approaching the gate, one after another. There's a kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels full, as if something is listening from just beyond the walls, just behind the mirror, just beneath the skin of reality. That's what Adi felt when he stepped back into the house. The moment he closed the door, the air grew thicker, not hot, but dense, like the air after a heavy rain when clothes refuse to dry and the walls begin to sweat. The house smelled different now, not like incense, not like sandalwood, but like wet cloth, musty, damp, ancient. The scent clung to his sleeves, it lived in the corners of the hallway, and it seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with each step he took deeper into the home. He lit a stick of incense out of habit. It fizzled at the tip, refused to burn. He tried another. It sparked, then extinguished. Smoke curled briefly before reversing, curling downward. He stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by fogged mirrors and half-faded family portraits. His father's image stared down from one of them, stiff, unsmiling, eyes just a little too sharp. Underneath the frame, the wood of the altar had begun to warp, cracked, like it was swelling from within. Adi reached toward one of the drawers. It was stuck. He pulled harder. It burst open, revealing dozens of folded white cloths, all damp, all bound with black string. That night he heard the sound again. Rustle, rustle, drag. He opened his eyes. The room was pitch black. The candle by his bed had snuffed itself out, but the sound was still there, coming from the hallway. Not footsteps, not bells, but the sound of fabric, wet fabric, dragging across the wooden floor. He stepped out of bed, feet touching cold tile, and slowly opened his door. The hallway stretched before him, still, empty. but near the end of the corridor, just beneath the hanging mirror, was a puddle, a perfect circle of water, dark and unmoving. And something else, a small piece of cloth, white, torn, frayed at the edge. He picked it up with trembling fingers. It smelled of incense and rot. The next morning, his cousin Putu arrived from the next village over. She brought fruit and silence. She said, "I heard about your father," and placed the offerings near the gate. Adi nodded. "No one else came." "No one else can," she replied. He asked her what she remembered of his father, of the excommunication, the rituals, the shame that drove his mother away. Putu lowered her voice. "They say your father could speak to the dead, not call them, bargain with them. He thought he could change karma?" She looked away. "No one can change karma, but you can delay it." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Just don't let it find you." Later that afternoon, Adi wandered into the room that once belonged to his father. It had remained locked for years, but the door now stood slightly open, like an invitation no one remembered offering. Inside, the walls were bare, the window covered with cloth, but the desk was intact, cluttered with papers, melted candles, burnt offerings long since crumbled to ash. And in the corner, a mirror, covered in linen, tied with black string. He approached, and just as his hand reached the cloth, something moved behind it. A flicker, a shadow, a shape just tall enough to be standing. He tore the cloth away. Nothing, just his own reflection. But it was wrong. The fog didn't fade, and his reflection was smiling. That night it rained, not heavily, just enough to make the roof groan. Adi sat near the altar rereading the scrolls. The notes were clearer now, as if his mind had begun to tune into the old language. One line stood out. To seal the spirit, the cloth must remain bound for 7 nights. To break the seal, simply listen. They will call you by name. He froze, because just outside the window, through the hiss of rain, he heard it. "Ah, Adi!" Soft, breathless, like something underwater. He snapped the window shut, but when he turned around, the floor behind him was wet, and from the hallway came a sound, not bells, not weeping, but the snap of thread. He lit a stick of incense, hands shaking. This time it burned, but instead of curling upward, the smoke slithered toward the door, as if drawn to something outside. He stepped back. The candle flickered violently. The room grew cold, and then, slowly, the door creaked open. Just a crack, just enough. A pale face wrapped in wet linen peered through, mouth sewn shut, eyes not angry, mourning. Adi collapsed to the floor, whispering prayers he barely remembered. The spirit did not enter. It only watched and wept, then faded into the dark. At dawn, Putu was gone. No goodbye, no trace. Only a trail of muddy footprints leading out of the house, back toward the jungle, toward Gunung Kawi. And in the shrine, the mirrors were no longer fogged. They were cracked, as if something had tried to crawl through. There are nights that pass like dreams. Then there are nights that stay, stitched into the spine of the world, whispering through every silence that follows. The 7th night was one of them. Adi sat motionless in the shrine, watching the final stick of incense burn low. Its smoke curled like a serpent, restless and uncertain, trailing toward the darkened corner of the room where the mirror once hung. He had covered it again, not for safety, for sanity. The last 2 days had devoured his sleep. Putu was gone. The villagers offered only silence or prayers whispered behind cupped hands. Every offering at the compound was replaced before he woke, not by the living, but by something else. Drenched flowers, wilted rice, coins smeared in red clay. And now, the 7th night had come. The air felt stretched thin, not just around him, but inside him, as if his body had become a conduit, as if something was listening through him. He lit the final oil lamp. The scrolls lay open beside him, stained with old wax and fingerprints that were not his. One line had changed. Where once the ink had read, "Do not enter after the 7th night," now it read, "You are already inside." The bells started just after midnight, not distant this time, but near, just beyond the walls. Ching, ching, ching. They did not echo. They pulsed, as if struck underwater. Adi stood. Something in his chest trembled. Not fear, but recognition. The sound was familiar now, embedded into his breath like an old song once forbidden, now returned. He stepped into the courtyard. The jungle awaited him, open, expectant, breathing. And at the edge of the trees, footprints, mud dark, bare, leading toward Gunung Kawi. The path was swallowed in mist. Vines sagged low, curling like fingers to brush against his arms and neck. Trees leaned together as if trying to conceal what passed between them. But the bells called him forward. Ching, ching. Not guiding, beckoning. He followed. Gunung Kawi revealed itself in fragments. The mist peeled away in sheets, unveiling jagged stone shrines half swallowed by time, cracked steps, overgrown idols, moss-covered prayers. But something was wrong. The temple was open. All 11 shrines had been unsealed. Stone doors, some untouched for centuries, now stood ajar. The carvings around their mouths had eroded into vague, pained expressions. Black stains bled down the cliff walls like tears. He approached the first tomb. The door hung loose on its hinge. Inside, nothing. No statue, no urn, no offerings. Only a puddle of water, still, black, and a bundle of white linen, twisted, wrung out like a cloth soaked in blood. One by one, he moved through the tombs, and in each the same, empty, wet, disturbed. And in the 9th shrine, something more. A whisper, not heard, but felt inside his ears, his chest, his teeth, a voice without sound. He bound them. He turned. A figure stood at the mouth of the 10th shrine, not hidden, not approaching, still. Wrapped in burial linen from head to toe, arms bound to his sides with black thread, its feet muddy and raw. But it was not the figure that froze him. It was the sound it made. A low, wet sobbing. Not violent, not angry, just mourning. It swayed gently, not with breath, but as if stirred by the memory of wind. And then another appeared. behind it, and another, a third, a fourth, all bound, all swaying, their presence heavy and hollow, like bells that rang only when no one listened. Adi backed away, heart thrashing, but his feet wouldn't obey, because something was calling him forward. Not the spirits, the shrine itself. The 11th and final one, the largest, the royal burial site once reserved for kings and priests. Its door was cracked open. He stepped inside. The chamber was vast, damp, cold. Stone walls stretched upward into darkness. The floor was flooded with shallow water, rippling faintly with every breath he took. And at the far end, an altar, unlit, unblessed, abandoned, except for one thing: a single white cloth, folded and placed at the center. On it, a name, his father's, but the ink bled, letters dissolving into each other, unreadable, as if the name no longer belonged to a person, but to something else entirely. And next to it, a mirror, not hung, not framed, but embedded into the stone floor. He peered in, and saw not his own face, but the swaying figure, weeping, behind him. He spun around, nothing. But the water at his feet began to ripple. From the sides of the room the bound spirits entered, one by one. No footsteps, no splashes, just presence. They surrounded the chamber, lining the walls like forgotten sentinels. And then, silence. Deep, heavy, absolute. Until one of them, the tallest, took a step forward. From under its burial cloth, it raised a hand and offered him something, a thread, black, knotted 7 times. It placed it on the cloth with his father's name, then bowed and wept. Adi understood. This was not a warning. It was a passing of weight, of judgment, of legacy. His father had used this ritual not to guide the souls of the dead, but to tie them to himself, to carry their karma, their debt, their pain, to avoid his own fate by borrowing that of others. But now the seals had broken, and the spirits had returned, not for vengeance, for release. He took the thread in shaking hands, and the spirits bowed once more, then vanished, leaving only the echo of bells. Ching, ching, ching. And the mirror, now glowing faintly with the reflection of something not of this world. A gate, a warning, a choice. Adi turned and walked out of the shrine. The path back to the village was lined with fresh footprints, all of them leading away from the tombs. But one set, his own, led inward, and now it would never fully leave. Back at the family compound, the shrine was alight. Every mirror cracked, every thread untied. The house smelled of wet cloth and old incense. But the 7th night had passed, and something ancient had awakened. Not evil, not angry, just unbound.
Karma doesn't vanish, it waits, follows the blood like a shadow passed from breath to breath, waiting for the last bearer to exhale. By dawn, the house no longer felt like a home. The mirrors remained cracked, the air never warmed, The scent of wet cloth had seeped into the floorboards, but something had changed, subtly, yet undeniably. Adi was no longer just a visitor. He was now a part of what had been disturbed. He opened the shrine. The altar had been rearranged. Where once sat the statues of Ganesh and Shiva, now stood a single bowl of blackened rice and a folded white cloth soaked through. His father's name was gone. The ink had bled into the fabric, erasing the past, or perhaps returning it to the soil. He took the cloth in hand. Beneath it, etched into the wood, was a name that hadn't been there before. His. Wayan returned in the early afternoon. His clothes were soaked, his eyes red. He didn't speak. He walked straight to the kitchen, poured himself a cup of stale tea, and sat on the floor like a man awaiting judgment. "You were at the tombs," he said, without looking up. Adi didn't answer. Wayan continued, voice shaking. "You saw them, didn't you? The ones he bound?" "They were waiting," Adi whispered. "They were freed," Wayan corrected. "But not by you, not yet." He placed the thread on the table. 7 knots, each knot a soul. Each soul once tied to his father's karma. "What happens now?" Adi asked. Wayan stared at the thread. "It depends," he said softly, "on whether they follow blood or intention." That night, the bells returned, but not at the temple. From inside the house. It started with the kitchen utensils, a spoon tapping against a bowl, slow and deliberate. Then the sound of footsteps above the ceiling, even though the house had no second floor. And then the whisper of bells, not ringing, but shaking, like someone trying to warn him from the other side. Adi entered his father's room again. This time the mirror was uncovered. It was clean, too clean. No fog, no cracks, only reflection. He looked in and saw himself, but older, weary, wearing the same white cloth his father had worn in death. His reflection blinked, but he hadn't. Then it smiled, and from the edge of the frame, something else emerged. A hand, pale, bound in black thread, reaching toward the glass from the inside. He stumbled back, slamming the door shut. The house creaked. The bells rattled again. This time, not just one, multiple, dozens, ringing in staggered rhythm like a procession of mourners approaching from all directions. He fled outside. The village was dark, too dark, not from the absence of light, but from the absence of presence. No candles, no voices, no dogs barking, only footsteps. Behind him. He turned. No one. But on the walls of every home, a symbol had appeared, drawn in ash and blood. A circle, pierced by a line, knotted 7 times. The same symbol from the scrolls. He ran to the elder's hut, the oldest man in the village, the one who had trained alongside his father before the excommunication. The door was open. Inside, candles flickered wildly. The old man sat cross-legged before a bowl of burning herbs, his lips whispering fast, urgent prayers. He didn't look up when Adi entered. "You shouldn't have gone to the tomb." "I had to." "No one has to," the old man snapped. "That's the lie your father told himself, that he had to protect you." Adi stepped closer. "Protect me from what?" The elder's eyes met his. "From what he did to others, so you wouldn't suffer his fate." He handed Adi a bundle of cloth. Inside, bones, small,
fragile, burned. These are not your ancestors. They belong to others, other families. Their rites were never completed. Their karma was taken. Adi's throat tightened. My father stole their death? He absorbed their karmic burden, the parts he feared he would carry into the next life, and to do that, he tied their spirits to himself. Their threads became his escape. Why? Because he feared the judgment that was coming for him, and he believed, in his pride, that karma could be tricked. The elder leaned in close. But karma is not a law. It is a mirror. Whatever you bind, you become. Outside, the wind picked up. But it wasn't wind. It was breathing. Heavy. Slow. All around the hut. The candles extinguished, and in the sudden darkness, the bells returned. The elder began to chant, but Adi, he felt pulled, not toward the door, but beneath the floorboards, as if something below was calling his name, not with voice, but with gravity, a pull in the soul. He backed away, but his feet refused to move. His ears rang, not with sound, but pressure, until suddenly, silence. He opened his eyes. The house was empty. The elder was gone. Only his bones remained, wrapped in the same cloth. 7 knots. Again. But one had come undone. He screamed into the night. No answer. Only the slow ringing of a new bell. Back at the house, the altar was lit again, not by his hand. The incense burned in reverse. Smoke slithered downward into the cracks of the floorboards, and from somewhere in the walls came the sound of weeping. Low. Female. Putu? My mother? The spirits? He couldn't tell anymore. He wasn't sure he wanted to, because now it didn't matter who they had once been. They were his. His father had passed the thread, and the bells were now his burden to carry.
There are screams in this world that no one hears with their ears. They are older than language, buried in stone, folded into rituals long forgotten. They do not echo, they resonate. And in the hollows of Gunung Kawi, one had begun to stir. The next morning, the village felt hollow, not empty, hollow, like something had scooped out its center and left the shell standing. Adi walked the streets alone. Every door was shut, every shrine draped in black. A rooster crowed, then immediately fell silent, as if realizing its call had awakened something it should not have. Near the edge of the jungle, he found a trail of footprints again. Small, bare, uneven. Not childlike, unlearned. They led toward Gunung Kawi, but the earth around them was cracked, as if something had not stepped on the ground, but through it. He returned to the cliffs by mid-morning. The mist had not lifted, despite the rising sun. Instead, it thickened, clinging to the stone shrines like breath on glass. Gunung Kawi stood as it had before, ancient, quiet, carved into the mountain like open mouths waiting to be fed. But something had changed. The vines had been torn down. The steps were clean. Too clean. Freshly swept, recently touched. He stepped carefully, heart pounding like a ceremonial drum. Each footfall echoed, not outward, inward, into the stone. The first shrine was empty. So was the second, and the third.
but by the fourth, he noticed something buried beneath the pooled water. A string, thin, black, trailing back into the tomb's corner, vanishing beneath the wall. He followed it, tugged it. It resisted. He pulled harder, and a section of stone shifted, not outward, inward, a hidden entrance. Behind the shrine, the passage opened like a wound, narrow and dark, carved not by design, but by desperation. This wasn't part of the temple's original construction. It was a tunnel, dug by hand, hidden behind the oldest tomb, and something alive pulsed from within. Not breath, not wind, a low vibration, like a throat preparing to scream. He stepped inside. The walls narrowed, brushing against his shoulders. He held his breath, moving carefully through the dark. The air grew colder, denser. It wasn't the absence of warmth, it was the presence of something else. And then the sound returned. Not bells, not weeping, but scratching. From within the walls. Soft at first, then louder, faster. Hundreds of fingers clawing to escape. He emerged into a cavern, small, circular, wet, carved directly into the heart of the cliff. At the center sat a mound of cloth, soaked, tangled, still, a heap of linen and bone and dried offerings, bound in so many knots it looked like a cocoon. He stepped closer. It began to move, slightly, then a little more. The cloth rose, stretched, and let out a sound so raw, so deep it didn't pass through his ears, it scraped across his soul. A shriek, not human, not spirit, something in between, a soul that had been tied too long. Adi staggered backward. The shriek continued, now layered with other voices, dozens, maybe more. Cries, chants, laughter, groaning, all at once, like every failed ritual in his bloodline had gathered in one place. And then, silence. The cloth collapsed, revealing beneath it a hole, perfectly circular, dug deep, unnaturally black. At its edge, more threads. 7 of them, each tied to a bone, a human bone. 1 for each knot, 1 for each soul his father had tethered. And 1 bone had just snapped. He picked it up. It crumbled in his hand. And from the hole, something rose. Not a body, a presence. A mist, black and flickering, like smoke caught in flame. It did not have a face, but it had weight, and it whispered, "He took from us and gave it to you." Adi collapsed. His heart stuttered. The world tilted. The mist surged toward him, wrapping around his arms, pressing into his chest, sinking into his mouth. He could feel them, the dead, the stolen, he unbound, crawling through his veins, speaking not in words, but in memories that were not his. A boy burned alive, a woman buried without a name, a child whose tongue was cut mid-prayer. Stolen karma. Their pain, once his father's shield, was now his inheritance. He awoke outside the tunnel. The sun was setting. The mist had regrown. The entrance was sealed, as if it had never existed. But in his hand he still held the thread. Only now it was red, and only 6 knots remained. Back at the house, the shrine was burning, not with flame, but with light. Unnatural, blue-white, like moonlight made solid. The altar was empty, The statue of Ganesh had cracked in half, and on the wall, written in soot, a single word: return. Wayan arrived before midnight, breathless and wild-eyed. He held Adi by the shoulders. "What did you see? Where did you go?" Adi's voice trembled. "There's a tunnel, behind the shrine. He buried the others, the real spirits, the stolen ones. They were trying to scream, but—" Wayan's face collapsed into his hands. "They've awakened," he whispered. "You shouldn't have gone alone." "They were never meant to stay bound, were they?" "No," Wayan said, voice thin. "But your father didn't believe in endings. He believed in trade." That night, Adi didn't sleep. He sat in the hallway listening to the house breathe. The cloth on the mirrors curled at the edges. The walls pulsed. And outside, something circled. Wet footsteps, slow, careful. But no knock, because whatever it was, it didn't need permission anymore. Not after the shriek, not after the stone had split. It had already entered.
Some chants summon gods, others guide the dead. But there are chants spoken in reverse, not to call something forth, but to undo what was sealed. These are not prayers, they are fractures in the language of spirit, and Adi had begun to hear them from his own mouth. The thread sat on the altar, coiled like a serpent, red and glistening. 6 knots now, 6 souls. The weight of them pulsed through Adi's veins like slow-moving poison. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Each time he closed his eyes, he heard them, voices speaking behind the veil of dreams, lips sewn shut yet still chanting. Each word felt backward, broken, as if the syllables were unraveling the world from within. That morning, Wayan handed him a recording, a small cassette, old, unlabeled. "I kept this," he said, not meeting Adi's eyes. "It was your father, before the exile." Adi slid it into the tape player. Static. Then a voice. His father's, chanting, but not like any mantra Adi had ever heard. The rhythm was off. The pitch shifted mid-line, growing thinner, then deeper. The words didn't flow, they curled like threads tightening into a noose. And beneath the chant, there was another sound. Crying. Soft. Muffled. And at one point, Adi's own name, whispered like a warning. He stopped the tape. His hands were trembling. His nose had started to bleed. That night, Adi stood before the shrine, the red-threaded cloth in one hand, the scrolls in the other. The ink had changed again. Entire verses were missing. Some had reversed. Mantras he once remembered now twisted in his memory, syllables flipping on themselves, meanings decaying. He tried to recite a cleansing prayer. His mouth moved on instinct, but the words came out wrong. And as he spoke, something in the room shifted. A glass cracked. A candle flickered, not out, but backward, the wax unmelting. The thread tightened, and in the corner of the room, the cloth on the mirror stirred. He turned to Wayan. "What's happening to me?" "You're not speaking your words anymore," Wayan said quietly. "You're speaking his." "My father's?" Wayan shook his head. "No, the spirits, the ones he stole. They're inside the chants now, and through you, they're trying to finish what he began." The next morning, the village bell tolled. The first time in years. Adi ran to the square. People had gathered, pale and silent. At the base of the bell tower lay a woman, one of the last elders. Her body was folded unnaturally, limbs bent as if pulled inward by invisible hands. Her eyes were open, mouth agape, throat shredded from the inside.
In her clenched fist, a string, red, wet, knotted once. Now 5 remained. That night, Adi found new notes in the scrolls. He didn't write them, but they were in his handwriting. The chant must continue. To silence them is to seal your fate. Bind or be unbound. The ink was still fresh. He dropped the scroll. His lips moved involuntarily. A low hum escaped his throat. Not speech, not breath. A chant. He bit his tongue to stop it. Blood filled his mouth, but the hum didn't stop. It echoed inside him, like his own voice had been turned against him. Wyon grew weaker each day. His skin thinned, his nails blackened. He spoke less, and when he did, it was in whispers, often to no one visible. He caught him once in the courtyard, placing 7 stones in a circle. He was crying. "They're taking the names," he murmured. "Once the names are gone, so is the memory. Then the body forgets how to live." Adi searched the village records, all the birth scrolls, all the family trees. Entire pages were smudged, names erased, lines dissolved. His own family's history had gaps now, entire branches missing. The bloodline was bleeding out, not metaphorically, spiritually, like karma itself had begun editing their legacy. Later, he returned to his father's room. The old mirror now reflected something else entirely. Not him, not the room, but a chamber, deep underground, stone walls lined with bones, and in the center, his father, kneeling, chanting. Except it wasn't him. It was Adi, wrapped in the same cloth, wearing the same string, mouth moving, but no voice, only the sound of unraveling. That night, he had a vision. He stood before the 11 shrines, all open, all empty, each one humming with unseen breath. From the cracks emerged hands, dozens, all bound in wet cloth, reaching upward. Each carried a thread. Each thread held a name. One was his. He woke, gasping. The cloth on his altar was gone. Only the red thread remained, now with 4 knots. Wyon didn't speak again after that. His mouth had sealed itself shut, not with thread, but with skin. His body was still alive, but his voice had been taken. He tried to write messages for him, but Wyon wouldn't read them, wouldn't look at him, as if acknowledging him would let something in. The house was no longer a place. It was becoming a shrine. The walls wept moisture. The floor pulsed like muscle. The mirrors had stopped reflecting entirely. And at night, the chant continued, sometimes from outside, sometimes from beneath, but increasingly from within him. He would wake with his mouth moving, soaked in sweat and incense smoke, whispering mantras with no origin. One night, he looked in the mirror and saw a piece of thread hanging from his tongue. He pulled it. It didn't end. It kept coming. Knotted, wet, alive. He burned the scrolls the next morning, or tried to. They didn't catch fire. The ink turned black, then vanished, and the pages crumbled into salt. Not ash, salt. Preserved pain. The village was fading. One by one, homes were found empty. No struggle, no sign of departure, just silence. And in each home, a thread on the doorstep. One less knot, always. Now only 3 remained. Adi, Wyon, and a girl. the daughter of the woman who died at the bell. Barely 10. She hadn't spoken since, but she watched Adi, as if she knew something he didn't, as if she was waiting. He tried to speak to her once. She placed a finger to her lips and whispered, "He's already speaking through you."
The dead do not always scream when they return. Sometimes they just watch. Sometimes they wait for you to recognize their face beneath the cloth. The days blurred now, thin veils of half-light and fog. The village no longer woke at dawn. It simply stayed dim. Time itself had begun to crack, just like the mirrors, just like the chants, just like the shroud. And on the 8th day, Adi saw it. It stood outside his window at first, midday, motionless, wrapped in white linen from crown to toe, bound tightly, the head swaying gently as if moved by wind, though the air was still. It didn't move, didn't speak, didn't vanish when he blinked. It was just there, as if it had always been, waiting for its turn to be noticed. He closed the curtain, but the window began to sweat. Beads of moisture slid down the glass, and behind them a single word formed. "Look." Adi stepped outside. The figure was gone, but in its place, footprints. Human, bare, deep with water, leading around the house, circling. Once, twice, 3 times, then ending at the shrine, where the incense had begun to burn in reverse again, smoke trailing downward into the earth. That evening, Wayan died. He didn't scream, didn't speak, just exhaled one final long breath, and with it a thread spilled from his lips. Red, tied in 3 knots. It slithered to the floor like a dead snake, and before Adi could move, it withered, turning to dust. Only 2 knots remained now. Adi and the girl. He buried Wayan near the banyan tree. No chants, no rites, no fire. Only dirt and silence. He didn't know what else to do. The proper ritual was gone, twisted by his father, dissolved by the unraveling chants, eaten by the spirits that now lived inside him. When he dropped the first handful of soil, he heard it. The bells. Not from the cliffs this time, from beneath the earth. Slow, heavy, as if the soul he'd buried hadn't gone upward, but deeper. The girl came that night, uninvited, silent. She stood in the center of the shrine, barefoot, hair wet, her eyes glowing faintly in the candlelight. She said one word, "Unwrap." Adi stared at her. "What?" She pointed toward the mirror, covered again, shaking slightly. She said again, "Unwrap." And then she opened her mouth. From her small throat came a sound Adi recognized instantly, but not from this world. A chant. One of his father's, one of the inverted ones, except now spoken from the mouth of a child who had never heard it before. He tore the cloth from the mirror, but instead of his own face, he saw her, the spirit, the mourner, swaying. Her shroud frayed at the edges now, cracks beginning to form along her head and chest as if the threads themselves were losing grip. And underneath, a mouth, no longer sewn shut,
a mouth that trembled, not to speak, to breathe. The mirror shattered. The girl collapsed, and behind them, the walls began to hum, not with sound, with memory. Adi saw his father again and again, performing rites that were never meant to exist, stealing karma, binding threads, tying names into cloths like curses folded in prayer. Each time he did, the same spirit appeared behind him, watching, weeping, waiting. The shroud was cracking, and the spirits were no longer bound to the tombs. They had entered the blood. The next morning, Adi found the banyan tree bleeding. Not sap, blood, thick, dark, seeping from the roots where Wayan was buried. And at the base, a footprint, deeper than before, sinking, as if someone had stepped into the world from beneath it. The villagers were gone, completely. No signs, no farewells, just thread. 2 houses now had threads knotted with no names attached, meaning the spirits had begun consuming identity itself. Adi returned home, and the girl was awake. But she didn't look like the girl anymore. Her skin was fading, slowly becoming translucent, like old paper held against firelight. And her voice, when she spoke, came in 2 tones, one child, one ancient. She said, "You are the last knot." Adi screamed at the altar, "What do they want?" His voice broke the silence of the house like thunder across still water. The air pulsed, the cloth on the shrine twisted itself, and from the walls the answer came, not in words, but in motion. The spirit entered, not through the door, through the mirror, or what remained of it. A shimmer in the air, a folding of space, and then her, standing, still swaying, but no longer silent. The cloth began to tear, thread by thread, revealing pieces of the face beneath. Not monstrous, not divine, just sad. So profoundly sorrowful, it hollowed the room with grief. She raised her arms. Her bindings dropped to the floor like dead skin, and she pointed at Adi. He fell to his knees. He understood now. The spirits weren't here to punish. They were here to be finished, to be freed, but only through the one who carried the thread, only through the one who still bore the knots, only through him. The girl approached, still glowing faintly. She knelt beside him, and in her hand she held something small, a blade, not metal, stone, ancient, still smeared with the faded blood of old rites. She placed it in his palm. "Undo what he did. Seal it with yourself," she whispered. The spirit stepped closer. Her face was almost visible now, and behind her others were forming, dozens, bound, cracking, waiting. Adi looked down at the final thread. Only one knot remained, his, and he realized there was only one way to stop the unraveling, not to cut the thread, but to tie it, to offer his own binding as the seal. He stood, took the thread in one hand, the blade in the other, and whispered a chant not from his father, but from his own breath, one he had never spoken aloud until now. A true reversal, not to bind others, but to bind himself. The thread grew hot, the spirits began to weep, and the shroud, the ancient linen veil, finally cracked open. From within it came light, not bright, not holy, just free. Adi collapsed to the floor, body trembling, thread burning into his skin like a brand, and when the final knot tightened around his wrist, the spirits vanished, one by one, released, returned, silent. Only the girl remained, and she whispered, "It's done." Then she faded, like mist. The house groaned, the shrine fell still, and for the first time in weeks, the bells were quiet. Not all rituals are meant to honor the dead. Some were crafted in fear, as quiet payments to keep the past from waking. But when offerings are forgotten, the debts come to collect. The silence after the spirits vanished was not peace, it was pause, a breath held too long, a moment not of closure, but of weight. Adi awoke on the floor of the shrine, thread burned into his wrist, palms blistered, the altar cracked in half. The house smelled of ash and something worse, the scent of prayers left too long unspoken. The girl was gone. No trace. Only a single object lay where she had knelt the night before. A broken kanang sari, the small square offering of woven palm leaf, now blackened, wilted, and soaked with old blood. He staggered outside. The village looked the same, but it wasn't. Shrines that once bore daily offerings now stood empty. The pathways once swept clean every morning were buried in leaves, and the banyan tree, the one that once hummed with ancestral presence, was dead. Its roots split open like ribs, revealing nothing inside, like the spirits it had hollowed. He found a journal in Wayan's room, old, molded. It belonged to his grandmother. Page after page of careful records, daily offerings, family births, Pitra Yadnya schedules, moon cycles. And then one page was torn out. A single entry remained on the next, scrawled in red ink. "We stole what wasn't ours. We fed him their names. We gave no offering to the ones he buried beneath the cliffs." Adi's chest tightened. His father hadn't just bound spirits. He had disrupted another ritual, a sacred balance between two families. And the other family? Gone. Wiped from every record, every name burned, every offering undone. No one in the village even remembered them anymore. But something did, and it was still waiting. He traveled to the far edge of the village, to the overgrown fields where the second bloodline once lived. What he found was a house reduced to stone and soil, blackened outlines in the shape of altars, a rusted bell tied with thread, and a pit, shallow, recently disturbed. Inside, bone fragments, too small for adults, not old enough for peace, buried without rites, forgotten by time, but not by karma. As he stood at the edge of the pit, the wind shifted. It didn't move the trees. It didn't cool his skin. It whispered, "You took their place." He dropped to his knees, tears falling into the earth. He whispered apologies, promises, but the air did not forgive, because apologies are not offerings. That night, he prepared the sacred kanang sari. For the first time, he built it himself. Palm leaf, flowers, rice, salt, smoke. But something felt off. The petals wilted as he placed them. The rice turned black before it touched the altar. The smoke curled downward again. And when he lit the incense, it burned with no scent, as if the gods had stopped listening. He tried to sleep, but in dreams he returned to the tombs. The tunnel behind the fourth shrine reopened. Inside, not spirits, but children, hundreds of them, sitting in silence, their eyes wide and empty, their mouths moving with no sound, each holding a rotted offering bowl, each one empty. And when they saw him, they didn't cry, they didn't scream. They simply turned the bowls over and wept. He woke up screaming. Outside, the bells rang again, slow, hollow, echoing not through air, but through bone, his bones. At dawn, he sought the help of the last priest in the district, a man who had long renounced Pitra Yadnya due to corruption and fear. The man was blind, old, but when Adi mentioned his father's name, the man flinched. He offered the wrong things, the priest whispered. He burned bodies without names. He made prayers to gods that do not forgive. And worst of all, he took an offering that was not meant for him. Adi begged for guidance. How do I fix it? How do I free them? The priest said nothing for a long time. Then he placed his hand over Adi's heart. You can't. Adi stared at him. They were not his to free, the priest said. They were stolen, bound, forgotten, and now their fate is tied to your blood. Then what do I do? Give them back what was taken. He left with no answers, only a sense of dread. That evening, the altar bled, not metaphorically, real blood, thin, dark and warm, seeping from under the wood. He pulled it apart. Underneath, hidden in the cracks of the shrine, fingernails, tiny, human, filed into spirals, as if trying to climb out, and a piece of parchment, wet, molded. One word remained: debt. He understood now. The curse hadn't ended when he tied the final knot. That was only his father's chapter. But karma was not linear. It flowed down, and now it had reached him, and beneath him, the ones his family had forgotten. He returned to the pit, dug deeper, bone by bone, some no bigger than a child's hand. He wrapped each one in cloth, placed offerings beside them. He chanted until his throat bled, and still nothing changed. No bells, no warmth, just wind, whispering the same word again and again. Too late, too late, too late. When he returned home, the mirrors were all gone, the walls bare. The thread on the altar turned white, then gray, then disappeared. No knots remained, not one, but the debt had not been erased, only inherited, and the offerings still unaccepted, because when you feed the wrong god, the right one never forgets.
Not all bindings are physical. Some live in the body, like breath, unseen but always moving. And some, once tied, become part of you, no longer rope, but vein. The thread on Adi's wrist had disappeared, but something remained. A faint ring just beneath the skin,
like a scar that refused to heal. It pulsed, softly at first, then stronger, as if the knot, though burned, still lived inside him. He traced it with his finger. The flesh felt wrong, softer, warmer, almost like wax. When he pressed it, he felt resistance, not pain, but something else, like something coiled just under the surface, waiting, listening. That night, the dreams returned, but not of spirits, not of the girl, not of his father, of himself, tied to the banyan tree, wrapped in white cloth, mouth sewn shut, not dead, not alive, just bound. And around him, villagers danced, blind, faceless, chanting a song with no melody, tugging red threads that ran through his body like puppet strings, each one ending at a different shrine. And as they pulled, he began to unravel. He woke, gasping. His wrist was bleeding, but not from a wound, from the thread. It had returned, knotted once, and this time inside his skin. He staggered to the mirror. There was no reflection, only smoke. Then, faintly, a shape emerged, him, but older. Eyes black, mouth moving. A chant began, muffled, backward. And behind the mirrored version of himself, the bound spirit stood, watching, waiting, not angry, just patient. He smashed the mirror. Glass scattered across the floor, each shard reflecting a different version of him, all weeping, all bound, all alone. He tried to burn the altar, but the fire wouldn't catch. The wood turned soft, mushy, rotting from within, and the offerings melted into paste. And the candles, they burned blue, flame without heat, light without blessing. In desperation, he fled to the village temple, the only sacred place left untouched by his family's legacy. But it was locked, sealed with red string across the gates, a sign carved above the door, bloodline barred, karma sealed. He pounded the door, begged, screamed, but no voice answered, only the wind, and then a whisper from behind. He tried to cut the thread, but it was never his to break. He turned. The girl was there, or something that looked like her, flickering between child and shadow, presence and memory. She reached out a hand and placed something in her palm. A small stone, flat, black, inscribed with a symbol he recognized instantly. A thread pierced by a needle, not tied, not knotted, sewn. She whispered, "You don't carry the thread anymore. The thread carries you." Back at the compound, he stood before the shrine. No fire, no incense, no cloth, just stone and silence. And the thread, now fully visible again. Not one, many, winding across his arms, his neck, his back, as if his entire body had become a loom. Each breath another stitch, each memory another strand. And as he watched, the threads began to tighten. He fell to the floor, gasping. The pressure built in his chest. His ribs strained. His heart stuttered. He couldn't scream, couldn't pray, only whisper. Not words, but names. Names he didn't know. Names from the other bloodline. Names never written, never spoken, never offered a ritual of passage. They were coming back, through him. He crawled to the altar, placed his hands upon it, and the stone cracked beneath his touch. Inside, not relics, not offerings, a face, his father's, not as he remembered him, but as he had become. Mouth sewn, eyes open, still weeping, still chanting. And from the corner of the broken shrine, a voice echoed, "I didn't bind them to escape. I bound them to you." The truth fell like ash in his throat. His father hadn't tried to save himself. He had tried to save Adi. Every stolen soul, every reversed chant, every broken offering, it had been a barrier, a wall built of karma to keep the bloodline safe. But now that wall was gone, and what it had held back was inside him. He screamed. The sound twisted mid-air. The threads tightened, and the altar split in two, revealing not stone, but cloth, red, endless, moving, alive. It coiled up his arms, wrapping around his throat, whispering in 100 voices at once. Not curses, not vengeance, instruction. He closed his eyes and listened. The threads didn't bind him anymore. They were guiding him towards something deeper, older, a final place, not to break the curse, but to complete it.
Every curse has a center, a seed, a stillness where the weight of generations sleeps, coiled like smoke in water. And when it is stirred, the surface breaks, and you see yourself. The thread led him back to the cliffs, Gunung Kawi. Not to the shrines, not to the tunnel, but to something deeper, hidden beneath the oldest layer of stone, older than the 11 tombs, older than the rites, older than the names written in ink and blood. He passed the last shrine, entered the jungle behind the temple, and followed a path the spirits had carved into his memory. Wyon once spoke of it, a place only whispered in stories no one ever finished. Taman Tirta Dalam, the pool beneath prayer, a chamber where high priests once purified their karma. But that was centuries ago, before someone tried to use the pool to bury what could not be cleansed. The entrance was buried in moss, a crevice in the mountain, choked by vines and roots, as if the land itself tried to forget it existed. But the thread in his palm tugged, so he entered. The descent was steep, cracked stone steps spiraling into the dark, each one slick with moisture and time. His breath echoed against the walls. Water dripped in slow rhythms, not chaotic, but measured, like a ritual still performing itself even after all its worshippers were dead. After what felt like hours, the tunnel widened. He stepped into a chamber vast and circular, domed like a womb, carved by hands that had long since returned to soil. And in the center was a pool, still, black, silent, its surface unbroken, yet impossibly deep. Surrounded by broken statues of deities that had been defaced, eyes scratched out, mouths covered in ash.
and at the far end, a platform of carved stone, its face etched with symbols that pulsed faintly in the dark. Adi stepped forward. The air shifted, warm, then cold, then aware. The pool was not waiting, it was watching. He knelt beside the water, peered into the black. At first, only his reflection, tired, tethered, hollow-eyed. Then, behind him, shapes, familiar, bound. But they didn't emerge, they sank, deeper, until the water shimmered and changed. He saw his father, kneeling on this very platform, thread in one hand, blade in the other, whispering a chant through trembling lips, surrounded by bodies wrapped in linen, each one tied with his family name. He wasn't conducting a ritual. He was bargaining, offering his own soul in fragments, stitching it into the spirits of those he had wronged, delaying judgment, redirecting fate. He saw his father cut the threads from others and tie them into himself, and then into Adi, while he slept as a child, while he dreamed of bells and incense and a home that never felt like his. Then he saw the girl. She wasn't a stranger. She was the last daughter of the bloodline they erased, the one sacrificed during the stolen Pitra Yadnya. Her body burned without blessing, her name never spoken, her soul unanchored. She was the first spirit his father bound, and the last one Adi released. He reached toward the water, but his fingers met no resistance. They sank, and as his hand disappeared beneath the surface, the reflections changed again. Not visions, judgments. Each one of his actions, every doubt, every silence, every moment he looked away when the truth stood before him. Not sins, but echoes, because the karma he bore now wasn't from what he had done, but from what he had inherited, and it would not end until he chose what to do with it. He stepped into the pool, fully clothed. The water embraced him like silk, cold but not painful, weightless but heavy with meaning. As he reached the center, the thread on his wrist began to burn. Not fire, memory. And then the water changed. Beneath him, the blackness opened, a void, a mouth, not to devour him, to offer him one final choice. At the center of the pool, a stone rose, perfectly round, and on it, a new thread, white, clean, unknotted, blank, waiting. He understood. This was the final binding, but not to seal spirits, to seal truth, to either let the cycle continue or tie it off within himself. He picked up the thread. It shimmered. In his hand it grew warmer, and behind him the spirits emerged, not swaying now, still, watching. No anger, no sadness, just release. If he chose to carry the debt, they would leave. If he passed it forward, it would continue. It would spread. More names forgotten, more offerings stolen, more knots. He wrapped the thread around his wrist. 1 loop, 2, 7. And as he tied the final knot, he whispered a chant, not inverted, not reversed, his own, pure, grief-shaped, unwritten. spoken from a place deeper than the shrine, the tombs, the temple. Spoken from the marrow. The pool pulsed. The air grew hot. The spirits lowered their heads, and one by one, they vanished. The water cooled, the darkness lightened, and the thread on his wrist turned black, not with corruption, but with finality. A thread no longer tied to others, but to memory. Adi climbed from the pool, soaked, hollow, whole, and the chamber behind him closed on its own. And when he reached the jungle again, the mist had lifted, the bells were silent, and the banyan tree had sprouted new leaves.
There is no escaping karma, only reshaping it. And sometimes the only way forward is to walk backward to the place where it all began and finish what was left undone. Not to save yourself, but to free the ones who never could. The pool had taken nothing from him, not his soul, not his name, not his body. But when Adi emerged, he was no longer the same, because now he understood the shape of the debt. The knot was not in the thread, it was in choice. His father had chosen to bind, to steal, to delay. Now Adi had chosen to carry, to remember, to return. But something still remained, a presence, not malevolent, not mournful, just unfinished, a ritual never completed, a spirit never spoken to. His father. That night, Adi returned to the shrine for the final time. He no longer feared the house, the walls, the fog. He had seen worse things inside himself. The altar was silent, the mirrors gone, the incense cold, but the thread still lay on the stone, now fused to his wrist like a second pulse, a reminder, a seal. He lit a single oil lamp, sat cross-legged before the shrine, and waited. At midnight, the wind stopped, the air thickened, the room darkened, not with shadow, but with presence. And then he arrived, his father, stepping forward from where there should have been nothing, wrapped in a tattered priest's robe, linen burned black at the hem, no longer bound, but not released. His eyes were hollow, his hands trembled, and on his face a strange expression, not fear, not sorrow, but shame. Adi bowed his head. "I know what you did," he whispered. "I know who you stole from." His father said nothing, only stepped closer, feet silent, body flickering with smoke. And when he reached the altar, he knelt, as if asking permission. Adi pulled out the last scroll, the one untouched, hidden deep beneath the altar, the original Pitra Yadnya rite, unaltered, unbroken. He began to chant, this time not from memory, not from fear, but from truth. Each word spoken as it was meant to be, not to control the dead, not to bind them, not to delay judgment, but to return them. His father wept, silently. The tears turned to ash before hitting the ground. And then, as the final verse echoed through the room, his body began to glow, faintly, from within. The threads that once wrapped his limbs, invisible for so long, now shimmered into view. Dozens, hundreds,
But instead of pulling tighter, they began to loosen. One by one, the threads uncoiled, not violently, gently, like a mother removing a child's blanket while they slept. The spirits he had stolen were not angry. They were simply waiting for release. And now, through Ari's chant, they had found it, not by being cast out, but by being acknowledged. When the last thread fell, his father collapsed forward. Ari caught him, held him, not as a priest, not as a mourner, as a son. For the first time in his life, his father's body felt warm, human, free. And as he drew his final breath, truly this time, he spoke only 2 words: "Thank you." Then dissolved into smoke, rising, not downward, up. Ari remained still for hours, until the thread on his wrist finally crumbled to dust. By dawn, the house felt empty, but not haunted, not cursed, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a story ends. But the world hadn't stopped. Outside, birds returned to the trees. Shrines were cleaned. A child laughed. Someone began sweeping the village square for the first time in weeks. Life was waking. Because the karmic tide had reversed, not by force, not by punishment, but by completion. Ari walked to the banyan tree one last time. It had bloomed, small white flowers along its roots, a sign of ancestral blessing. He placed the final chanang sari underneath it. This time, the rice didn't rot. The petals didn't curl. The incense burned sweet, and the smoke rose upward. He did not speak. There was nothing more to say. Only the feeling of something vast and invisible letting go. Karma, finally, had no more names to call.
Some spirits haunt because they are angry, others because they are forgotten. But the ones who stay the longest are the ones still waiting to be mourned properly, not feared, not chased, but remembered. They came with the sunrise, the villagers, slowly, cautiously, drawn not by fear, but by something gentler. The bells had stopped, the fog had lifted, the mirrors no longer cracked. But in the center of the village stood Adi, still, silent, changed. He carried nothing, not thread, not scrolls, not grief. Only the look of someone who had walked through death and come out carrying its breath. The temple doors, sealed for years, had opened on their own. And for the first time since the exile, the people gathered there again. Not to celebrate, but to watch. Because some rituals require no audience, only a witness. Inside the temple, Adi lit the sacred fire. The same pit his father had once used for the unsanctioned rites. This time, not to control spirits, but to honor them. He had rewritten the chant, not reversed it, not modernized it, but healed it. And when he knelt before the flame, he didn't chant it aloud. He breathed it. Every word came from the weight of all those lost, both stolen and forgotten. It was not loud, but the silence that followed carried its echo. He poured water over the altar,
placed white petals in each of the 4 cardinal directions, smeared ash across his brow, then removed his shirt, and with a blade made of obsidian, he cut the skin just beneath his wrist where the final thread had once lived. Blood welled, not fast, not fearful, and with it he whispered, "I release what was never mine. I carry what was always meant. I remember so they may forget. I grieve so they can rest." The ground didn't shake. No spirits screamed. No wind howled. Instead, something deeper shifted. The air softened. The stone breathed. The temple, for so long sealed by shame, became sacred again. And then they came, the spirits, not bound, not cracked, whole. Dozens of them, walking not in sways and jolts, but with grace, clothed in light. They did not cry, they did not curse. They simply bowed their heads to him, each one placing a hand on the altar, and one by one they turned to smoke, not gray, not black, but gold. His father was last, no longer bound, no longer afraid, just free. He placed his hand on Adi's shoulder. For a moment, the room grew impossibly quiet, and in that silence, a final message passed, not spoken, not written, but felt. You did not inherit my shame. You chose your own redemption. And then he too vanished. Adi remained kneeling, his arms smeared with ash, blood, and flower dust. The villagers approached, some in tears, some in awe. No one spoke. They simply offered him water, food, a cloth to cover his shoulders. He accepted none. Instead, he rose, walked past them, and began the climb to Gunung Kawi. The cliffs greeted him like old stone mothers. The 11 shrines stood silent, no longer empty, but no longer haunted. He placed a single offering at each one, a petal, a name, a breath. He wasn't sending them away. He was welcoming them home. At the final tomb, he knelt again and tied a new thread, not red, not black, not knotted, just a single white thread left loose, floating, waiting, because the cycle had ended, but remembering had only just begun. He did not return to the village that night, or the next, but the people knew where he was, because each morning at dawn, a thin line of incense smoke rose from the cliffs of Gunung Kawi, and in its center a figure could be seen kneeling, not praying, not weeping, mourning. Not for his father, not for the spirits, but for everyone who had ever been buried without a name. They say he stayed for years, that his voice was only heard during eclipses, chanting to no one in particular, that the vines never grew over the tombs again, that the spirits never returned, because someone was finally there to honor them, not as a priest, not as a savior, but as a witness. The villagers built a new shrine beneath the cliffs. They carved only one name into the stone, the Mourner. No more needed, because his story had become the offering, his grief the ritual, and his silence the chant that set them free. Some stories do not end with a scream, or a curse, or a final breath. Some end the way rivers meet the sea, softly, inevitably, without ceremony. And in Bali, there is a place where the dead no longer walk because someone chose to kneel forever. Years passed. Tourists returned to the island, drawn to beaches and waterfalls, unaware of the stone cliffs further inland, where the air is older and the shadows remember more than they're supposed to. Gunung Kawi remained as it always had, carved into the mountain, quiet, ancient. But those who wandered too far, locals or visitors, often came back with stories of seeing a figure on the steps, of incense burning with no fire, of bells ringing with no wind. They called him many things: the last priest, the stone watcher, the spirit binder. But the name that stayed was simpler: the mourner. No one remembered his real name, only that he came from a family no one spoke of, and that one day he climbed the cliffs and never came back down. Some say he was cursed, others that he was chosen. But the villagers knew the truth. He was the one who chose to remember. Every year, on the 7th night after the first full moon of the harvest season, the people left offerings at the edge of the jungle, not for gods, not for ghosts, but for him. A single thread, a bowl of rice, a petal from the white banyan flower, nothing more, nothing less. It was not tradition, it was gratitude. Children grew up hearing the story in whispers of the boy who returned after his father's death, of the red thread with 7 knots, of the chants that burned backwards and the cloth that wept. But more than anything, they remembered the rule: do not disturb the temple. It is already being watched. One morning, years later, a traveler ignored the warnings. She wandered through the jungle before sunrise. A photographer, they said, or a writer. No one could remember her name. She was quiet, kind. She said she only wanted to see the shrines. She never saw the spirits. There were none left. But she felt it the moment she stepped into the clearing. That stillness, that breathless hush, like the earth itself had paused. And then she saw him, or thought she did. A man, kneeling at the center of the highest platform, back straight, head bowed, wrapped in white. The smoke from his incense drifted upward, perfectly still. She didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. And then he turned his head, only slightly, not to greet her, but to acknowledge that she was witnessing something sacred. A single moment, a single heartbeat in a story far older than her camera could capture. When she blinked, he was gone, but the incense still burned, and the offering at the base of the shrine still warm. She returned to the village in silence, said nothing for days, and when she finally spoke, she left only one sentence behind: the temple is sealed, but it breathes. No one has tried to climb since, because some stories don't need sequels, some prayers don't need to be spoken, and some spirits once released leave behind more than fear. They leave stillness. So if you ever find yourself walking near Gunung Kawi and you hear bells, soft and slow, don't follow them, don't fear them, just stop. Close your eyes, and for a moment, be still. because somewhere above you, carved into the cliffs, beneath moss and prayer and memory, the mourner is still kneeling, not trapped, not cursed, chosen. And the temple, once desecrated, once howling, is finally silent, finally sacred, finally sealed again.